Life Source Education and Encouragement presents Series 2, Walking the Path, Part 1, my first 6 years in nonprofit affordable housing. This will be Episode 1, titled Learning, covering years 1 and 2 on my journey. There is an old saying, you can't go home again. As I understand it, it means that if we leave a place and we change while we're gone, the place doesn't seem the same when we get back. That's especially applicable to my first 2 years of life after coming back from the Million Man March. I knew I was different. The people around me did not know I was different. I tried to share it and explain it, and they heard it as an interesting story. Glad that I had a great experience. But I don't think they actually understood that I was really, really different. But that would play out over time. While I was at the march, I had an instantaneous internal transformation. The core of my being shifted to, let's say, a higher frequency. When I returned from the march, the world around me was still at the same frequency, and perhaps more explicitly, the life I'd built was no longer compatible with who I had become, or perhaps I should say, who I was becoming. Because a shift in being is kind of like a shift in direction. You know, you're heading in a certain direction for a long time. You make a 1-degree change in your heading. And it doesn't seem like much at first, but the longer you stay on the course, the further away from the original heading you are, and you can see the gap widening and widening. This first episode of Season 2 can be summarized in 2 big parts. First, professionally, I came back from the march, I left a toxic old job, and I took on a healthier new job. That new job started rough, but got better over time. I was able to start living out my new values and new beliefs, my new way of being. I came back a different person to a life built by the old me. I no longer fit in it, and I began the process quite involuntarily of tearing that life down. So it was a 2-year period of becoming topsy-turvy, being happy at home, unhappy at work, to being happy at work and unhappy at home. And to be fair, the people in my personal life did nothing wrong per se. I was different. My ability to function in that life was impaired. So just my simple inability to exist as I was existing, just that itself was corrosive to the social fabric. And I'm sure I didn't understand it at the time, and nor did anyone around me. So I'm sure a lot of things that happened were confusing for all of us. The new role I took on was in a lot of ways a big step backwards. I took the job for half of what I'd been making before. That presents its own struggles. It was an entry-level position, so I was at the lowest rank. Everybody was above me. The headquarters for the organization was a renovated single-family home. I had been accustomed to large offices and spaces, very modern, very sleek. My office was literally the size of a closet, and I had a very old computer with no mouse. I had to learn all the keyboard shortcuts just to do the basic parts of my job. And I came from an environment with very modern equipment, very modern computer systems. So it was sort of a weird step backwards for me. The good news is, I had a history of entering situations at the lower level and working my way up. It's important to speak to the fact that in my old job, which 10 years in the hotel industry, it was a very toxic environment. It was motivated by the tenets of capitalism, greed, vanity. I mean, getting ahead was what mattered. Lying, cheating, stealing, whatever you had to do to get ahead, you did that. Perception was reality. The things that I really cared about were not valued. Honesty, trust, um, hard work, and merit. Nah, folks, always trying to shortcut, always trying to kiss butt and people please, would throw you under the bus in a heartbeat. And it was a very anxious environment, very unhealthy for me. In my new work environment, it was much healthier. I was much healthier. The nonprofit environment wasn't driven by profit, like trying to make money. Greed wasn't the motivation. Vanity, while it always exists somewhere, wasn't the major driver. People value things like honesty, teamwork, valuing each other, supporting each other, helping each other grow, because we were all working together towards a common goal. And that was what mattered, the common goal of helping people who were less fortunate with a very basic and important part of life, which is housing. I'll speak to two sets of behaviors that had varying levels of challenge. The first was the maintenance director that I worked with. He was a gruff dude, big guy, deep voice. Was very abrasive in his language and his vocabulary and his tone. But he had a really good heart. You could tell by what he said and how he worked that he cared about the situation. He cared about the people around him. The new me was able to ignore the rough style with which he spoke and interpret his intent and work with him to establish a good relationship and help him do well because what he was doing is helping us do really well. A more difficult behavior that I had to deal with was a pair of managers, two ladies that were tight. I mean, I don't know the history of the relationship, but when I met them, they were sitting together at lunch, and they demonstrated for me over the course of the next few weeks that they were mean. They were very negative, sharp-tongued, um, criticizing, putting people down, very excluding attitudes. I mean, think like mean girls from high school. They were difficult to be around. Fortunately for me, I wasn't the same guy who left for that march previously. That guy would have given back as good as he got. I would have reflected their behaviors to them out of a sense of defensiveness, pride. That's what I learned. You grow up and you learn someone hits you, you hit them back. The new me was able to not personalize their behavior. After all, we just met. How can you really dislike someone that you just met? I was able to discern that their issues were their own. Their behaviors had to do with who and how they were. And I realized that adding fuel to that fire wouldn't help anything. So instead, I responded to them with kindness. I was patient. I let insults, snarkiness, sarcasm just roll off my back. I didn't even acknowledge it. I just moved forward, treated them well because that's the environment I wanted to have. I knew I needed to be that way to create the kind of environment I wanted to work in. Over time, the mean girls changed, or at least partially. One of them, in response hopefully to the way I was treating her, separated herself from the other woman and began functioning in a healthier, kinder, more cooperative way. And I think she generally has a good heart. Unfortunately, the other woman didn't. She stayed in the mean girl persona and eventually committed some acts and behaved in ways that got her fired. I'm obviously not happy that she got fired, but it was easy to see how our attitude, language, and behaviors eventually led to that. One beautiful thing I experienced in that first 2 years was approving applications and helping a family move into a new construction, beautiful, affordable apartment, and knowing that it was going to help them improve their lives. A very sad and difficult thing I experienced was having to participate in an eviction. In Kentucky at that time, once a court ordered eviction was supposed to happen, the sheriff's office did what was called a set out, meaning if they came, the family was there, or we let them in, they would literally have to put everything in the apartment out on the street. And of course, the sheriffs wouldn't do that. It would be the management staff doing it. And we had to do it once when there was snow on the ground. There was a family fully living in the apartment, comfortable, warm, eating soup, whatever. And we knocked on the door. Sheriffs told them they were being evicted, had them leave the apartment, and we had to go in and move their furniture out into the snow. That was heartbreaking, but apparently necessary. Unfortunately, this professional growth was in part responsible for the disintegration of my personal life. Because I was making less money, I had to take on a part time job to help make ends meet. I was part of a household, after all. So there I was working full time Monday through Friday, banker's hours, and my part time job was Friday night and Saturday night, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. So I'm working a lot more just to maintain the same lifestyle. There was no upward financial mobility, and the people around me, I'm sure, were not happy with that. It could go without saying that more work, time away from home, particularly overnight, 2 nights a week, put a strain on my relationship with the woman with whom I lived. It also negatively impacted my behaviors, my attitudes, my general health. I mean, I was sleep deprived in reality. There was sometimes I would wake up and it was dark and I don't know whether it was morning time or nighttime. I don't know if I was coming or going. And of course, the loss of quality time with my loved ones bred some discontent in all of us. Over time, circumstances changed. My inability to be who I was not the only factor that helped my personal life to disintegrate. My partner's mother was diagnosed with incurable cancer, and that's a giant impact on us, particularly my partner. She made the decision to move in with her mom to help take care of her, get her through chemo and just be the support person because her mom did live alone. Of course, that meant that the distance between my partner and I grew after she moved, despite, I'm sure, what were our best efforts. And at a certain point, I was unable to afford the rent on the apartment that we had lived in together, so I was forced to move. Throughout that 2 year process of the disintegration of my personal life, there was a lot of pain. Working from diverging values meant my partner and I really couldn't work on a life together because we envisioned different things. Honestly, I was in a state of denial about it, which led to some paralysis. I mean, I knew I was different. I knew I wasn't being who I was supposed to be, but didn't have the humility, maybe even not even the understanding to be able to communicate that and do something about it. To review the key points, my new vocation was flourishing. I was fulfilling the promise of faith that I'd had. The cost was the loss of my personal life. A lot of pain, a lot of struggle, often unacknowledged. Denial and paralysis just made that worse. I was left flying on faith at the end of that 2 years in a state of grieving, suffering with the loss, feeling responsible for it, but encouraged and sustained by what I was learning and what I was doing in my professional life, my new vocation. So, what did I really learn in that 2 years? First, transformation that is internal can be instantaneous, but manifesting the impacts of that transformation externally can take time. It often involves a lot of sacrifice, being misunderstood, letting people down, being both the hero and the villain in my own story. All of that is challenging. I learned that in relationships, there are understandings and agreements. And when we change internally, some of those become void. If we don't address that directly and deal with it, it will cause disintegration of that relationship. That will have a lot of confusion coming along with it. My hopes for you, as this part of my story speaks to necessary sacrifice and unavoidable loss on the path to fulfilling destiny, may it help you see your struggles and losses as part of the pruning process on your journey of changing for the better. A reminder on building together. If you want to support this labor of love, scan the QR code, or you can copy and paste the link into your browser. Coming soon, Walking the Path Part 1, Episode 2, Applying Years 3 and 4. Thank you so much for being here.